Hello everybody. So, my video on the episode 8 hallway scene reached over 1000 views in 3 days. So, I think this is what I'll be doing for the foreseeable future. Taking random scenes that are occasionally talked about in the fandom, and going into depth on them. May not be breaking new ground, but hey, I just like to yap about things I like, and it's obvious you guys like to listen to my yapping. In this video, I'd like to go over the scene in the 7th episode where N decapitates quote-unquote Tessa. Episode 7 in Murder Drones is my favorite, mainly due to personal reasons, as it was when I would be hyped for the show, as 7 would be a turning point. Or maybe I'm just obsessed with the number 7, I don't know. Anyway, this was a major turning point in the show. And it delivered, as it gave so much lore confirmations that I spent 6 months waiting for. Anyway, I want to discuss this scene, and tell why I think it's Sen's coolest and coldest scene. It gives a huge feeling of catharsis. After being pushed around by his superiors, being demeaned, demoralized, and repressed, to the point where he'd thank someone for abusing them, and saying that he deserved getting his arm sawed off, when he had far quicker means to lob it off. This was such a cathartic scene, as N finally grows a backbone, and stands up to someone for what he thinks is right. In the video, I'll cover N's character journey, leading into the scene, cover the scene's context, the scene itself, and then talk about it, while comparing it to others' discussions. This will include how some people see it as N being overprotective, as I'll throw my own 2 cents into the discussion. First, let's talk about N's journey in the show. I'm going in the show's in-universe chronological order, not the episode order. I'm going to mostly skim over his life as a worker drone, as it isn't terribly important to the video's topic, but it does show one thing about N's character, his deep care for others, and his willingness to stand up for them, even to his own deterrent. As seen in the 5th episode, he'd put himself in harm's way to protect those he cares for. He did this for Sin, standing up to Mrs. Elliot despite her risking to throw him and Jay out, and he did that to V, giving her glasses back so she wouldn't get her head crushed by Sin, even if it meant V would be able to start the lobotomy on him. This sets up how he's always been mostly the same, and showing how a core part of who he is someone who cares deeply for others. Anyway, N would have his good life stripped away by Sin, losing so much, including his memory of everything in the manor. In the 1st episode, N says this.
I also can't seem to remember the past 3 hours of my life, but I'm sure that'll sort itself out.
This implies that N has had his memory wiped on more than one occasion. From what? I don't know, maybe J, via the virus thing she gives N in the last part of the episode, but that's a theory for another video. Anywho, N has been beaten thoroughly into submission, once again, to the point where he thanks J for stepping on him, and thinking her in high regard. Sure, V cared for him, but she never, nor could she show that she loved him, as explained in my episode 8 hallway review, or an upcoming V analysis, but that'll be for a milestone. Anyway, Uzi was really the first to show any care to N. And N inspired change in Uzi. Uzi would be the emotional support to N, and vice versa. She'd inspire him to get more of a backbone, and help him stand up for himself, with N being himself gives Uzi a friend. The two help one another, and really do feel like they complete each other. Another thing to note, something I was very thorough in discussing in my last video, is that under stress N thinks very impulsively. This normally blends into his drive to protect those he cares for, and normally to N's detriment. I'm going to mostly skim over episodes 2 through 5, but I'll take a detour with 4. I wanted to briefly talk about this scene. This is a bit of a precursor to the main event, as V wants to kill Uzi, and N defends her, lashing out on V. Like the scene in 7, people show this as N being nothing more than Uzi's lapdog, doing anything for her, and I couldn't disagree more. Sure, to the audience, V had a pretty good point, but N didn't know that. Sure, he probably should have asked what was wrong with V, and why she's doing it. But this fails to consider N's reached out multiple times to V. And I feel this chance in the third episode was kinda N's final straw with V, as V keeps stonewalling N's attempts to get to her. Once again, V has perfectly good reason to do so, to keep N safe, but she couldn't tell him. I feel N was justified to lash out on V. He didn't really hurt her, he just showed he was putting his foot down. He was sick of V not telling him the truth, and when it came to her killing the only person that cared for him, I think it's right for him to get pissed. I don't think that N held it against V, as he just mildly scolds her after she gets her ass handed to her by Solver Uzi. On a side note, I feel N's relationship to V is kinda rushed even as a huge fan of V, and as someone who enjoys the N-V ship. I kinda feel that the writers kinda skimmed over N's part of his relationship to V. I feel like V's relationship to N is deep and complex, but N's relationship to V needed to be smoothed out a bit more, as it kinda feels like N was tired of V, and then we get a line like this. But I digress. Anyway, in the 5th episode, he gets the Cliff Notes version of his memories. Note here, he didn't get all his memories back, just what he relived with this thing. I'll come back to this point later. Anyway, V and Uzi find Tessa and Jay with Doll. Once Doll realizes Tessa was being friendly to V, she stole the keybug and ran, with everyone following her, unable to get her. So he, Uzi, V, and Tessa enter into the abandoned cabin fever labs. He gets separated from V and Uzi after Alice ambushed the four, with him and Tessa being put in the same room, separate from V and Uzi. Tessa and N escape, and then after some time, Tessa shows N that Earth is gone, showing the destructive power of Solver users. This started to really put everything into perspective for N. This makes N realize he has a ticking time bomb on his hands, in the form of Uzi. This already puts N in a very bad state of mind, contemplating with killing his best friend and love interest to save the universe. This isn't helped by what happens immediately after. The next major scene after is V's sacrifice. This I feel heightens N's poor mental space and worry. Not only did he care for V, she could have been an extra voice to help. V was normally there to make the hard decisions for N, and now she's gone. N even shows his more aggressive and impulsive side, trying to get back to V by clawing his way up the elevator shaft, only stopping once he nearly flattened Uzi and Tessa. Tessa had to talk N down. I know people use this as an example of how he only thinks of Uzi, as he almost immediately forgets about V, but I disagree. N is in a very poor mental state. The last thing he'd want is to harm anyone else, especially after losing V. Plus, with literally everything else that happens in the episode makes it hard for him to focus on V's assumed death. It's kinda hard to grieve when so much stuff happens to you immediately after. Anyways, from here on out, everything would rely on N's judgment to kill Uzi or not. Also, considering what happens next, with N scaring off Uzi, accidentally letting off a notion of possibly killing Uzi. This puts N at his lowest, and when the cave-in made by Uzi's Solver settles, we get this scene.
I deserve this, I deserve this, I deserve this!
This scene shows how bad N's mental state is. He's sawing off his own arm, even though he could just slash it off in seconds. N's absolutely at his lowest point, even to the point as he says it's what he deserves multiple times. Then, Sin comes, and shows that N was made by her, to kill humanity. This is a revelation, that puts a major dent into everything he thought he knew. Also, to make things even more screwed up, Sin came via a hologram of Maid V. That is just so screwed up on so many levels, not only teasing N with a ghost of his presumed dead friend, but one from what he'd probably regard as a simple time. Nori then saves N's life next, and then escapes. nor E further confirms what Sin implied, that yes they were sent by Sin, and not the company. She also tells N of the patch to cure their solver. This further would make N suspicious of Tessa, as Tessa wanted him to kill Uzi to quote-unquote save the universe. So, if there was a patch that Tessa knew of, she'd have some ulterior motive for killing Uzi. So, when N finds Uzi, right as Tessa was literally one flick of the wrist from ending Uzi's life, this exchange happens.
You knew about the patch, yes or no? One chance.
Cute. You know why I keep you around here?
Tessa, giving N a vague answer to a yes or no question, leading N to cut off her head, in his most badass scene to date. This is cathartic on so many levels. N's finally standing up for what he believes in, and not taking others' BS. Probably due to N's poor mental state, and impulsive behavior, he wasn't taking Tessa's words. He wanted a yes or no answer, and Tessa skirting around the question, responding to N with something Sin said earlier to him, was the final straw. If Tessa was telling the truth, she'd probably have said something. I love how this is the culmination of everything compounding on N at this moment. Uzi being taken by the solver, V's assumed death, Uzi fearing him, Sin showing him that his life was a lie, finding out that Tessa was gaslighting him to kill Uzi, and then finding Tessa about to end Uzi's life. After Tessa squanders her last chance, N has enough and decapitates her. He takes it out on the one who was manipulating him. All his life he's been manipulated, and taken advantage of. Sometimes for his own safety, like in V's case, or to his deterrent, like with Sin. This feels like everything compounding into one scene where he can finally stand up for himself. Now, I know some fans see this as N doing this, in blind devotion to Uzi, almost like a yandere. I'm being hyperbolic, but I feel that this is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what is going on in the scene, and in the grander context. N did this because he was under an immense amount of stress. First, he found out he'd have to kill Uzi, then immediately lost V, he made Uzi fear him, and he found out his life was a lie. There is a lot compounding on N at this moment, making him act on whim. Now, some people bring up that Tessa was like N's mother figure, and N killing Tessa while in hindsight was a good thing, but at the moment at best is morally dubious, and at worst cements N as a borderline yandere, with the point that he'd have done this to anyone regardless of who was in Tessa's place, even someone like V. So, let me explain my thoughts on this debate. First, N's relationship with Tessa wasn't that warm to begin with. And I'm talking this Tessa, not this Tessa. While sure, I and others like to say that her relationship with N in the manor was mother-son, but considering every scene in 6 and 7 with N and Tessa they were very transactional, N didn't seem to reciprocate Tessa's love for him. And why should he? He doesn't have all his memories back. Remember, N's only exposure to his past was what he relived with Uzi in the 5th episode, plus some scattered memories. And with every single interaction that we saw between Tessa and N was very limited. The only positive interaction the two shared was this scene. Sure, it's implied that they are close, but N wouldn't know this in the present, and even if he did, why should he care? He barely remembers Tessa. He only experienced the events of his past via episode 5, and Tessa hardly interacted with N. He was mostly told that he had a good relationship with Tessa in the past. Other than that, he hardly knew her. Also, I'm not including the scenes where N and Tessa weren't together, as N would be with this dumb crow exploring the basement. Once again, he only relived a sliver of his memory. So, even if N and Tessa were like mother and son in the manor, N would remember it, only being shown, not feeling it. After all, he barely knew Tessa personally, due to his memory wipe. Okay, so let's say that V was in Tessa's place. N would probably just talk her down, as he has a better understanding of why V would want to kill Uzi. He understands V much more than he does Tessa. He may not agree with V, and try to fight her, but not kill her, as he understands that V has her reasons, and does care for N, even if she's unclear about it. While compared to Tessa, N finds out that Tessa was lying, and manipulating him to kill Uzi. I say that, as V has shown herself to be vulnerable before, while quote-unquote Tessa here didn't have that luxury. I'm not trying to invalidate the opinions of others, I'm just telling my interpretation of this scene. But, it still probably wasn't the most moral thing to do, jumping to murder, even if Tessa, her sin was exposed for lying, but it does show off N's character imperfections, so that's a plus. So, with most of that, I want to dive into the nitty-gritty of the scene. First off, I love the setup. Uzi is panicking after seeing what her mother did, and by proxy what could happen to her. Then Doll stumbles in, passing out, with the words "fight back" on her one good eye. Then Tessa coming in, just giving off all the right villain vibes. As Uzi frantically tries to defend herself, Tessa isn't having any of it. Then we find out that something's not right with Tessa, as Uzi can't interact with her via the solver. Tessa then brings Uzi to her knees, slowly driving her sword into Uzi's chest. I love how cinematic it is too. How cocky Tessa's being, as it is sin under the suit. This fits her character perfectly. Another bit of foreshadowing. Then N comes as Tessa brings her hand down on the sword. I also love how N's sounds in the scene, showing the sheer animosity, fear, rage and worry feeding into a scene that sells N's determined anger. Michael Kovac's performance was top-notch. I love how his voice crack he does when he talks.
Yes or no? One chance.
N's a teen, and that little detail sells N's desperation. I love that little attention to detail. Sure, it could have been a perfect accident, but it adds to the scene's desperation. I love how cold the scene feels as well, as there is hardly any music as N talks, with the music swelling as he cuts Tessa's head off. It just gives more power to the scene. And then this leads into one of the best fight scenes of the show, that I could make a whole video about. So, that's all I have to say on this scene. This is truly one of my favorite scenes in the show, and I just wanted to make this video to put my thoughts out there. You all seemed to love my hallway scene analysis, being the first video to break 1,000 views in 3 days. I can't thank you enough for that. Anyway, I just wanted to rant about this scene. If you have anything to add, or call me out for being an idiot, go ahead in the comments. I kinda treat them like my email, and try to respond to each one. So yeah, sayonara.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.